Thanks for joining with us today, everyone. And we have Damian Almeida from Gale Resources, and he's one of the trainers there at Gale. Thank you for your time today, Damian. We know you're a very busy man, and always enjoy having you. And I'll hand over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Maureen. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. And what I thought I'll do today, and for the benefit of Emma, I was just listening to the conversation before, is I'm going to do this training a little bit different today. So what we'll do first is let's look at the platform, look at how you access these resources, and then I'll talk about the actual product itself, because that will give you both context, and it'll also give you that level of familiarity to fearlessly browse through all of the other Gale resources that you have available at Western Sydney. So I'll start by sharing screen. I'll share sound. Boom. Okay. So this is what the Gale Primary Sources platform looks like, specifically the archives of sexuality and gender. Now, what's really interesting about this particular or Gale platforms on a whole is that features and functionality are common across all Gale platforms. So whether you're browsing the archives of sexuality and gender, or if you're browsing something like political extremism or whatever archive you have, the features are the same. What's going to be different is the content. And also there's going to be subtle nuances depending on the type of content that we're accessing as well. So very quickly, just some of the things you can do on Gale platforms. If you click on the top left-hand corner, this option over here, and select the option View Product Menu, that's going to take you back to this page here where you can see everything that your university has access to. And it's broken up by the different types of products. In context products, ebooks, periodicals, which are curated, aggregated journals and magazines, trade publications. They're basically databases. Primary sources are historical content, literature, business, and there's some more stuff in there as well. But today we're going to look at the archives of sexuality and gender. And as a user, there's a few things that you'll need to know before you start using the platform. One, you can sign into Google or Microsoft, and the reason for doing that, it's completely anonymous. But the reason for signing into Gale platforms is if you come across a document or something that is relevant to the research you're working on, you can save that to your personal Google Drive and continue the reading once you go back home. So if you're using a shared computer at the library, or if you've spent, 5-6 hours on the platform and you've come across this great selection of documents that's going to help with your dissertation or project, save that to your Google Drive. That's a great way to do it. And the reason we allow individuals to do that is because all Gale platforms are session specific. We don't save user-generated content for privacy reasons. All right, having said that, there's the advanced search features. I'm not going to go and show you how to advanced search. You're going to be experts in that. But I will say that in the advanced searching options, there's a few other things that you'd like to use, like there's Boolean expressions. If you've never used that before, there's some explanations that you can find over here on how to use these expressions to draw out the content. And there's all different kinds of options over here to help you draw out content from the archive itself. Now, the publication search, depending on the archive, there are multiple publications that are part of an archive. In this instance, you can see there's about 2,000 odd publications. That is separate from the documents or the monographs that we have available over here. So you can browse through these publications, use these filter options on the right-hand side to curate your search further. And you can also browse by date. The other option is a topic finder. This is a great way for you to start your search. So when you select the topic finder, what this does is it curates your search and represents it in a visually, in a visual way in which you can then seamlessly navigate through the content. Let's, for example, say I'm interested in searching for something about, I've gone blank. We're looking at archives of sexuality and gender. Let's say GNDERFLUID. Just the keyword gender fluid. I'm not sure if it's one or two words, but we'll just give it a go. All right, you can see over here, I've typed in the keyword gender fluid, and what it's done over here is curate all of my search results into these topical clusters. From here on, if I'm interested in looking at artists, all I've got to do is click on artists, and it draws out the content that has been tagged by, artists and the word gender fluid. So these key terms appear across these two documents. So start with using Topic Finder. Another great way you can sort of find content or the occurrence of content in the archive is if you scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, there's something called term frequency. What the term frequency really does is it maps the occurrence of the term that you're searching for over a timeline. So let's say we want to search for gay. We'll add a few different terms over here. Lesbian, maybe. Sorry. All right, just type in these three key terms. Let's go from 1900 onwards. Hit search. What it does is you can see over here, it's mapped out the occurrence of these terms across the timeline. So I can see the term gay is pretty prominent around 1994 to 1997. And what that really tells me is that this term was used in about 3,000 or 36,000 documents in 1997. So it's a great way for you to find, documents that contain that key term. Now, if you're interested to explore, say, for example, in 1997, there were 7,000 documents that contain the term bisexual. If I'm interested to interrogate that, click on the plot point, and that will take you into the search results page where you can see over here the key term bisexual, and it's showing me all of the different content types that's available that contain that key term. Now, from here on, one of the things you can do is you can use these filter options to filter your content down further. Say, for example, you're only interested in any content that's coming from maybe the Australian Queer Archive. So we'll select that option. And now that brings it down to 1,300 articles that I need to browse through that contain that key term bisexual. So that's a great way to sort of narrow down your search based on what you're looking for. And of course, you can then take it into the topic finder to visualize these 1,300 results. So just click topic finder, and those 1,300 results have been visually curated over here into these topical clusters, from where you can then say, okay, I'm only interested in looking at advertising or health or, bisexual men, for example, depending on where you want to take your research. Let's go back. Go back to the home page. So that's the topic finder and the term frequency. The other really important thing that I would recommend you start with is the Learning Center. For any Gale archive, all Gale archives have a Learning Center. These learning centers have been developed to orient new users to Gale archives and the content in the archive itself. So it's built on these four key concepts: conceptualize, find, read, and use. Now, under the conceptualize, you can see over here, there's a little bit about this archive. Why have we digitized this content? Where is this content coming from under the source libraries? The key thing with historical primary sources is the source libraries. These are key libraries around the world that have collected this content over numerous years. So you can read about these source libraries and about the collections and how they've gone about collecting that if you want some context to the collections. Now, if you need some help with sample topics and searches, try this. You can just select any of these options. There's a heap of examples that are provided over here, giving you, try phrasing or try keyword searching. For example, you can see there's questions, lots and lots of help material over here for to sort of get you started with using the archive. Under the find, there's the terminology that we use, how to use the topic finder and term frequency. Under read, we talk about metadata and citation. I'll look at that. And under use, it's how to reuse this content in your research. So start with the Learning Center as a launch pad. Get familiar with the archive and the content and the features that we have across Gale platforms. Going back to the home screen, what it lists over here are the individual modules or archives in this series. So there's about 6 different archives. I believe you have all 6. I could be mistaken, but I think you do have all 6 archives available at Western Sydney Uni. And each of these archives
Sorry, Damian.
Yeah.
I think they just have they don't have part 6 yet.
So community in North America?
Hold on, let me check. Sorry for interrupting it.
No, while you're checking, drop it into the chat box.
Yeah, okay, I have a look right now.
No worries. So each of these archives have been released over a period of time. So the first one that we released was the LGBTQ history and culture. Now, if you're interested in this particular collection, click on the box and then you can see there's a little bit of an explanation about this archive and all of the collections that's available in here. Now, when I go to the PowerPoint, I'll give you some more context about this collection in a whole. So that's how you would browse through these collections. And if you, from the home screen, if you select collections, it will list out all the collections that's available over here. Each of these individual collections have come from a particular source library, be it, you can see it over here under source library. We've got content from the Australian Queer Archives, the British Library, Duke University, just to name a few. If you're interested in all of the content from the Australian Queer Archive, click that option and it'll filter it down. Now, having said that, if you're looking for Australian content, don't just select this option because there is a bit of content that comes out of the Canadian Lesbian and Gay Archives. This is Australian content that they've collected and digitized, but because they've done it, it's Australian content from the Canadian Lesbian and Gay Archives. But again, it's a great way for you to sort of, find these collections. All right. That's just a quick introduction into the platform. We'll look at features very quickly. I'll just show you if you come across a particular document. Let's just open up the Mattachine Society. You can see over here just a little bit of an explanation about this source library, this collection. You can select the option View All Documents, or what we started doing recently is the way in which these documents have physically stored at the source library. We've tried to capture that information as well. So you can see here in Series 1, they've stored all of the documents in Box 1, Folder 1. All of this is relating to correspondence. Now, this is really key for, researchers because they may be familiar with how these documents have been physically stored at the source library. So that's why we try to capture this information. But if I were to go look into this document over here, I'll just click and open this up. Very quickly, I'll talk about the features and what we're seeing on the screen. This is the scanned facsimile of this particular document. Let's go to just random page number 12, for example. You can see over here, it's a scanned correspondence document, what probably looks like an email. One of the things you can do on the left-hand panel over here, you can go into View Options and turn on Text and Image, which is the OCR, or Optical Character Recognition, for this particular document. So whenever we scan documents, we try to convert that into this readable text over here, which you can then download. There's also a few other options you can see over here, the illustrated works that's available in this document, the citations, there's notes, and again, these notes appear from time to time, depending on the level of information available about these documents, or you can search through this document of 51 pages for other keywords. What we're seeing here is just information about this particular document, where it's coming from, which archive, which source library, and things like that, and the date as well, which is really important. At the top here, you've got your citation, and the send to is where you will click to save this to your Google Drive. Now, I did not sign into my Google Drive, but if I had, I can click the Google Drive and it'll send it automatically to my Google Drive, or I can choose to email it to a friend, a colleague, or to myself as well, depending on how I want to work with this document. You can also download this and save it to a USB if you wanted to, or print. And of course, we've got the get link. Now, the get link is a persistent URL which will bring you back to this particular page. You can use this link and embed that into your presentation, your assignment, or you can share it on social media if you'd like to as well, if you have something to say about the particular document that you're investigating. So that's how you would use get link. So that's just a quick, outline about features and functionality. I'll just quickly stop sharing. If anyone's got any questions, please do feel free to jump in at any point, unmute, and ask. Let's keep this as interactive as possible. Nothing? All right, let's go straight into the PowerPoint. If I find that, there's it. All right. Now, let's talk a little bit about this particular archive, the archives of sexuality and gender. Now, it's a pretty big archive, so I will try to stick to the time, but I'm going to apologize much in advance. There's 6 archives over here, and it is packed with some amazing information about these archives. So I'll try to be as brief, but I'll try to give you as much information as possible. So we'll skip through all of the agenda, and I'll just outline what you have available. So Adi, my colleague, just confirmed that you do indeed have access to all 6 parts of the archives of sexuality and gender. Parts 1 and 2 are essentially looking at, LGBTQ history from 1940 all the way up to the current day. And part 2 was released, once we released part 1, part 2 was, because of the success of part 1, we sort of further built upon that information. We found new source libraries, new information, we've digitized and released that. Part 3 is sex and sexuality. I'll talk a little bit about that. Essentially, this part of the archive is looking at 3 key collections. There's private case files from the British Library. There's sexual history and sexology books from the New York Academy of Medicine. And there's early literature from the Kinsey Institute that's included over here. Now, in part 4, what we've done is we've sort of further expanded the geographical coverage of this particular archive. So this is where you'll find content from the Australian lesbian and gay archives. I think they're called AQUA now. It used to be called, got the previous name, the Australian Queer Archives. That's what they're called now. They used to be called ALGA, Australian Lesbian and Gay Archives. Yep. Oh, and also there's coverage from, Africa, and there's also content from the Lesbian Historical Archives or History Archives, which is looking at organizational records and geographic files. I'll talk a little bit about that. L'Enfer is essentially a private collection from the National Library in France. And L'Enfer translates to From Hell, I think, if I'm not mistaken. This was a collection that was sort of kept towards the other side of the room. And it was an exclusive collection that only certain individuals had access to. And so it's really fantastic to have that here. Predominantly in French, but there's a bit of English in there as well. And the last part of the archive that we released, I think it was last year, is looking at community and identity in North America. So this is looking at Mexico, the US, and Canada predominantly. But there's a bit of content coming out from Australia, New Zealand as well that you'll be able to find over here. All right, let's break it down and talk about why this archive is really important. Archives of Sexuality and Gender, it offers a cross-cultural perspective, and it's really important information, especially if you're studying, sexuality and gender. It offers multiple perspectives on LGBTQ communities. It covers all of the different organizations, individuals that have pioneered or worked towards, equal rights, so to speak, for LGBTQ communities. And there's some key moments in history of the LGBTQ history that are being covered over here, which is really important as well. And much of this information is rare, but there's also a bit of gray literature that's available over here. And if you've never heard of the term gray literature is essentially content that was never meant to be preserved or saved. It could be things like as simple as a coaster, an LGBTQ coaster at a bar, or a flyer that was produced for a protest movement. It was meant to be, they may have only published like about 100 of these. It was meant to be distributed and discarded. But thankfully, individuals preserved some of this gray literature, and that's what you'll be able to find here as well, which is really exciting as well. A lot of that comes from the geographical files, which I'll talk about when we get to it. All right, let's skim through these contents very quickly. So the first one is the Archives of Sexuality and Gender, LGBTQ History and Culture since 1940. This is about 1.5 million pages. Essentially, there's personal documents, government papers, NGO documents, there's periodicals and pamphlets, not just from America, but from around the world as well. There are 19 individual collections in this particular archive. The first one is the records of the Mattachine Society, the Daughters of Bibliotheque, which is one of the earliest U.S. gay and lesbian rights organizations. I think they're still in active, not service, the word is, they're still active. Files of the Albany Trust, there's militant groups again, and is great coverage of the Stonewall riots. In fact, there's a few dissertations that you'll be able to find on our website, or a sample project that someone wrote about the Stonewall riots. There's records of the Committee for Homosexual Equality. There's government documents over here relating to the AIDS epidemic in the 80s as well. So lots of great content. But if you break down the collections, you can see over here 19 individual collections. If you go directly to the platform, which we just saw, you'll be able to see information about each of these collections. And there's a beautiful write-up about each of these collections as well, to give you context about where that content is coming from, why that content was digitized, and what it essentially pertains to. So what's really unique about part one is that it contains these periodicals that have been written for and by the LGBTQ community. And these holdings reveal many functions, that printed media held and still hold for LGBTQ individuals. Things like creating and fostering community, entertainment, the sharing of news, advertising of the advertisement of meetings and demonstrations, and also to showcase LGBTQ friendly businesses. If you think about the time period in like the 1940s all the way up to maybe the 90s, finding information about LGBTQ friendly businesses was not easy. It was taboo, it was rare, it was hard, and it was only by word of mouth. So it's really fantastic to see how this information was spread in that early part of the 20th century. The other things also you'll find over here, some great topics that you may wish to explore as well, like the homophile movement, the ACT UP movement, and a lot of that is contained within the pages of these periodicals that I should have probably started out with a quick disclaimer before I got into this presentation today. A lot of the content in this archive can be quite graphic, but and at Gale, we don't take a particular viewpoint in terms of right or wrong. Our job is to digitize this content and present it to you academics or researchers, and allow you to draw your own critical opinion from these documents. So just a full warning that there's none in the presentation today because I'd be shot down, but there is quite graphic content in the archive itself. But there's also some really fantastic, really great content as well. Some really great stories. I've got one, I think, which is in part 4 of the archive about this. Actually, I'm jumping ahead of myself. When I get to that, I'll tell you that story. But there's a lot of great Australian content in here as well. If you're looking for Australian, New Zealand content or regional content from, our neighbors, this is an archive that you'd want to sort of browse through. You can see newspaper articles as well. Part 2 of the archive, essentially what we've done here is we've expanded on that coverage that we released in part 1, but we sort of went a little bit further and we started to look at, minority groups, but we sort of built up on the periodicals, manuscripts, government records as well. But we also wanted to highlight underrepresented communities and provide fresh perspective on some of these diverse communities, and allow researchers to sort of make connections between, the culture and activism as well. You can see there's collections from like the Two-Spirit people, the Jewish LGBTQ community, for example. This one's got about 32 collections in here as well, quite diverse and quite, looking at different minority groups as well, which is really exciting. Now, the key collections you can see over here, this is actually from the One Nation and Gay and Lesbian. There's some key collections over here. The Jim Kipner papers essentially contains autobiographies, nonfiction books, essays about the gay and lesbian community. The Simonowski collection essentially looks at Dan Simonowski, the person who collected this, you know, was collected a lot of this information under the Freedom of Information Act. I think for a lawsuit that he was working on, if memory serves me well. So all of that content that he collected is part of this particular collection. Then we have ACTA, which is a grassroots LGBTQ community that was trying to make positive changes around AIDS and create AIDS awareness in community. And then, of course, there's collections like the Twice Blessed collection as well. What I'll do is, in the interest of time, I mean, I can go through each of these collections, but I'll also give you the opportunity to sort of browse through the archive itself and find out a little bit about these collections. But what I will do is I'll try to skip through and give you context about why does part one really complement part two. If you think about it, the focus on niche groups. So part one looks at more mainstream LGBTQ organizations and groups, whereas part two looks at things like the activism. It looks at the marginalized or you know, the LGBTQ groups on the fringe, so to speak. And there's some really great coverage over here of these individuals as well. Part two offers a more global perspective. So with part two, we've expanded the collection, the source libraries. We went a little bit further outside of, you know, looking at more far-flung areas, so to speak, in digitizing content. And then it's also region-specific. You can see we've got content coming in from Mexico, Canada, the UK, as well as Asia and Asia Pacific as well. There's also a bit of content, like I said earlier, from Australia and New Zealand that you'll be able to find in this archive. But it's not necessarily coming out of Australia. It's coming out of the Canadian lesbian and gay archives because they were collecting this content in that point in time. So that's just a quick point to note as well. And of course, between parts one and two, they sort of really complement each other in terms of the coverage, in terms of the groups, in terms of the organizations. You can see over here, just to give you a very quick example, from the Canadian Lesbian and Gay Archives in part one, we've got periodicals and newsletters. But in part two, from that same source library, we went back and we've digitized posters, papers, international vertical files. And we tend to do this from time to time. We'll go to and because all of these source libraries, they've got millions and millions of pages of content pertaining to a particular topic. So when we digitize and build the archive, we go in with a laser focus. We pick a topic, what we're going to digitize this or archive around, and we pick documents, we digitize that. And in this case, in part two, we further expanded on that. So we went back to these source libraries and we digitized all of the other content that they have available. And we'll do that from time to time. We'll go back and see if they've got any new content, any content that we may have missed, and try and digitize that and make sure that all of this is captured for preservation. But also, one of the key things that parts one and two really do well is coverage of key issues as well. Key issues relating to, you know, moments in history or individuals, and that's really exciting as well. You can see this particular individual, I think their name is Jack Vera, if I'm not mistaken. I think there's another poster that I have that talks about this particular individual. So this part is not relevant. This is for anyone new, but if you're thinking, does part one make sense with part two? They work together, they complement each other. And like I said earlier, lots of great content coming out of Australia in this archive. All right, let's move into the Archives of Sexuality and Gender Part 3, which is looking at essentially these case files. These are three key collections from the British Library, the Kinsey Institute, and the New York Academy of Medicine. Each of these are really interesting collections. But you can see over here from the British Library, we've got about 2,500 monographs. There's multiple different languages over here. These are private case files. The earliest publication is from 1600. The books from the New York Academy of Medicine, there's about 1,500 books over here. The earliest publication is 1,500 all the way up to 1954. Again, multiple different languages over here as well. And the books from the Kinsey Institute. There's about 1,400 books over here, again in multiple different languages. You can see lots of these books are really rare and really old, start in the 1500s and all the way up to the 1900s. Very quickly, I'll give you some overview about each of these. First, we'll start with the private case in the British Library. It's one of the largest. The collection is made up of printed books that were sort of segregated from the main library from about the 1850s on to the 1900s on the grounds of obscenity. And, you know, a lot of these books were really obscene and their subject areas were quite, you know, diverse and varying in different topics. And also it was because of the age as well, they wanted to restrict this to individuals about a certain specific age. You can see some examples over here from the types of books and content that, you know, is part of this particular document. Most of this is erotic literature, some on social science dating from the late 1700s as well. But almost all of the private case erotica in this collection was produced by men for men. So it's a little bit, the content is a little bit interesting. But also it contains some of the earliest published works on homosexuality. And in fact, one of the most widely prosecuted books at that particular point in time was the Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure from 1749. It was first published in 1748. It was commonly known as Fanny Hill. And there's multiple, as you can see over here, it's a book that has been reproduced over time and is one of the most widely prosecuted and banned books in literature. So there's some other great content that you'll find over here in the private case files as well. We're moving along to the New York Academy of Medicine. Just a little bit about this. There's about 1,500 books over here covering multiple different topic areas around sex and sexuality and in human history. And this particular collection of the New York Academy of Medicine, there's some really great collections that have come out of the New York Academy of Medicine. There's books on, you know, giving parental advice, on, you know, marriage, on things like, you know, lots of different things, birth control, or talk about, you know, how to have sex and intercourse with married couples, for example. It also covers things about the dangers of self-gratification, for example. Lots of great topics in there to browse through. And then we get to the early literature from the Kinsey Institute. Very quickly, a little bit about this. This content was collected by Dr. Alfred Charles Kinsley. He had two primary goals, you know, to research human sexual behavior and administer that research into resources. And a lot of this, the content in this collection varies in topics in the history of sex and sexuality. One area that is covered over here looks at behaviors, it looks at attitudes from about the 18th and 19th century as well. And the books in this collection are taken from Dr. Alfred Kinsey's personal collection and his research into sexuality. All right, we'll move along from this into part 4, which is the Australian content. And I'm going to quickly do a dramatic pause if anyone's got any questions, while I take a quick sip of water. Any questions?
So sorry, while you've been talking, I looked into the banning of the Memories of Fanny Hill. Has it, you know how it was banned because it was considered to be the first English pornographic novel? Is it still banned, or is it?
Well, look at it this way, Maureen, if you're still living in the US, practically every book is banned today.
Oh,
But the book itself is now, let me put it to you in a different way. There's more obscene literature out there today than this particular title. I don't know if it's currently banned, but during that point in history, it was continuously banned, you know, for the nature of its content. But it probably could be banned in some countries or states as well. You would never know. But that book it's infamous for being continuously being banned or its erotic nature. But having said that, there's other prose pornographic novels that is part of this archive that is just as equally obscene as that was never banned because it was always kept under lock and key, and it was kept in restricted sections, so it wasn't widely promoted, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that I just found that really, really fascinating. That's all. Yeah, thank you.
No worries. All right, we'll skip to this one, part 4. All right, part 4 is essentially looking at, we call it international perspectives, but it's content that is coming out of Africa and Australia. And again, we're trying to increase our geographical coverage. And what this archive does really well, it looks at or it highlights cultural and social histories. It looks at the struggles for rights and freedoms of the LGBTQ community. And it also looks at the exploration of the idea and meaning of sexuality. Now, this archive is around 500,000 pages. There's 3 source libraries over here, but there's 28 collections. So 28 collections coming from 3 source libraries. What's really exciting about this archive is there's some really, really rare content in here. Papers of Simon Nicolai, who is a South African anti-apartheid gay and lesbian rights activist. Exit newspaper, which was South Africa's longest running monthly LGBTQ publication. Lots of great content. So the 3 source libraries are the Australian Queer Archives, the Lesbian History Archives in Brooklyn, and the Gay and Lesbian Memory in Action Gala. That is the one that I want to focus on today, also the Australian content. But from the Australian Queer Archives, we've got the Australian LGBTQI periodicals. Really great collection. Do dive into that. But the Gay and Lesbian Memory in Action, there's one collection over here I'm trying to quickly find out is there's one that is, LiQWYD, number 15. LiQWYD is a really small collection of 91 pages. And what's really significant about that particular collection is, and actually I think I've got a story here. Here we go. All right, let me tell you this story of this individual, LiQWYD, Francis Chisholm Bishop, I think. To tell you how valuable this archive is, Francis was essentially studying in college or university, and he sort of gave this interview to this magazine, LiQWYD, where he talked about, being a gay, as a gay individual, and how life was as a gay individual. Now, this was in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is notoriously famous for cracking down on anyone who is considered different from the norm. So either if you're not a man or woman, you're considered a blemish on society, so to speak. So the government cracked down, and they cracked down really hard. Anyone who was associated with LiQWYD were called out. They were expelled from their families. Even if they were suspected of being gay, they were beaten up or chased out of the country. And LiQWYD as an organization ceased to exist within a few months of that publication in 1991. Most of the founders or people who worked at LiQWYD had to flee the country for their life. Why this is such a significant collection is because it's only 90 pages that was salvaged and saved from this particular collection. And it's a great way to showcase how, by digitizing this content, we are preventing the erasure of stories and experiences of LGBTQ people from this part of the world where they're still being persecuted till this day, across South Africa on a whole, so to speak. But it is such a significant collection that is part of this archive. Then we have this Simon Nicolai papers as well. Simon was, was charged with treason, with multiple different things. He helped change the attitude of the African National Congress to gay rights. He was a really prolific activist who worked with, multiple different organizations to bring about awareness and there's such a great collection. And also not to forget, this part 4 is where you can find the wealth of the Australian periodicals. Then we come to another great collection from the National Library in France, the L'Enfer collection. Very iconic, very famous. It's one of the, one of those large private cases that's out there. It was kept under lock and key in a different part of the library. L'Enfer hell actually refers to the shelf mark given to this particular collection. While many of the books were considered morally reprehensible at that particular point in time, in today's context, in the literature that you'll find out today, a lot of this is like reading something like naughty or something. It's not really that obscene, but at that particular point in time, it was really bad. There we go, another collection, as you can see over here, Fanny Hill. This one's from 1888. So this one's about, I'd say around 600,000 pages, predominantly in French, but there's a bit of English, Italian, and German in here as well. And there's two collections that's part of this archive, the L'Enfer collection and the Flagellation collection as well. Now, we've got some really great videos that I'll probably send to you, Maureen, after this, where our publisher talks about this collection in great detail. So do check that out as well. I find him exceptionally funny. He's got the most amazing sense of humor, and he makes this collection sound really exciting, if that's a thing I can say, actually. But you should watch that. I'll send you that video. But L'Enfer in a whole is 2,600 volumes from the 16th century all the way up to the present. And the Flagellation collection consists of literary works that looks at some really unique and interesting things like spanking, caning, and whipping. So again, I've just quickly checked my colleague. Addie's still on the call. Well, I was going to say the French do, collect multiple things, which is really interesting. But it's a really exciting collection. Do check it out. Most of it is in French, but again, there's a bit of English in there as well. And I did have to, put a little smiley faces in there. Like I said, there's a lot of great content in here, but a lot of it is obscene. But I'm going to skip this slide. Let's just, there's some great collections from this individual, Marie-François Quingard, who talks about the L'Enfer collections. It's in French, but there's subtitles over here. Again, I'll send you these videos as well for anyone interested, where Marie talks about these collections on a whole, and she's really knowledgeable about the whole L'Enfer collection. So do watch these for context for this particular archive as well. There's some great content available over here. You can see some great examples over here, some really rare books. I'm skip through all of these. You can see some really great topics over here. And there's a bit in English as well. This is from the Flagellation collection. Some more stuff in here. Oh, I've got a lot of examples. We'll skip some of these. Okay. I've actually... Oh, yeah. This is the last part. Part 6, Community and Identity in North America. It's essentially a 20th century collection offering perspectives on society, sexual identity, community building, and gender issues in North America, Canada, when I say North America, Canada, the US, and Mexico. And it'll sort of, it casts a spotlight on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and materials look at things like activism. It looks at social justice. It highlights disabilities in queer societies. It looks at alternate sexualities. It looks at the conflict between sexuality and religion. It looks at diverse ethnic communities across North America that are part of this. I can see over here. All of this comes from just a little bit. There we go. There's 4 different source libraries over here, about 1.2 million pages, quite a big collection over here. Just to quickly mention, this is not a rehash of parts 1 and 2. It's completely different and new material that's available over here as well. And there's about 25 collections, if I'm not mistaken, coming in from these source libraries. Here's a quick listing of these, it's 26 collections, my apologies, from this particular collection. There's some really great topics over here that you can browse through. Some of these collections very quickly. There's the FTM conference tapes, audio files. FTM stands for female to male transition, or female to male. That's the acronym. And there's also the FTM International Records as well. So some great collections in here. It looks at diverse groups like the Filipino Task Force on AIDS, for example. It also has, content coming in from, American or Japanese Americans that were put in internment camps during the Second World War. This particular one is from Jiro Onuma. Again, this individual was in one of these internment camps, identified as a gay individual. And there's also, papers like Leonard Maltovich, for example, who sued the government because he was sort of outed as a gay man, and there's so much great content over here as well that you can read through as well. This looks at the issues of sexual identity in the armed forces, something that's still an ongoing issue in the United States as well. All right, very quickly, again, there's a wealth of Australian, New Zealand content in here as well. There's some great examples that you can browse through in this particular archive. I've tried to capture some examples over here, but, there's video content and there's audio content that's available in this particular part of the archive that I would recommend that you browse through as well. There's also this individual from the University of New South Wales, Professor Garrett Pestige. There's a lot of content that he's published that's actually part of this archive. I may have some examples. Here we go. Garrett was responsible for these publications that you'll find in this particular archive as well. So, a local face, someone from around the corner from Western Sydney University that you may know who's actually in one of the Gale archives. So very quickly, these archives, or this particular archive, is multidisciplinary, that covers multiple different areas of study: government, religion, philosophy, women's studies, psychology, cultural, media studies, activism. It looks at these, minority groups. It looks at these organizations that were started up to fight for rights for different LGBTQI groups, for example. So it's a really great archive. And the other thing also that I wanted to quickly mention, I know I've sort of run way above the time, I do apologize, is the Learning Center. Going back to that Learning Center, please, if you're going to browse through the archives, start with looking at the Learning Center. Read a little bit about the archive section. That essentially gives you context as to why this archive was digitized, where this content is coming from. And also from time to time, one of the things we do is we get academics to write contextual essays for us to summarize the archive. So do check those out. You'll find them in multiple different Gale platforms, essays that have been written about, different topics that's available within the archive itself. So in conclusion, just the details of my colleagues, or my colleague Adi, who's on the call today as well, if you do have any questions. But I would recommend, I'll stop sharing for a second. If you do have any questions, your first point of contact is the library at Western Sydney University, or reach out to Maureen, and Maureen can liaise with me and Adi and sort of get you the information or help in anything that you're working on. So start with talking to a librarian if you've got questions, and they'll be able to help you. So I hope I gave you as much information as possible. Sorry about the speed at which I had to give that to you. It's a big archive, not one of our biggest, but the other biggest archive is coming up in a few weeks, I think.